What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Bischoff and Brown right here on the Detroit Lions podcast. He's Scott Bischoff. I'm Russ Brown. We're back. You are probably getting us on almost back-to-back days, or maybe 1 or 2 days here, because we've had our mock draft dropped, a 7-round mock that we did on a Sunday afternoon, just having some fun.
Yeah.
You guys saw on Tuesday. So be sure to let us know how wrong we are and how we're a bunch of idiots. But we're here
Everybody already knows that.
Exactly.
Hash all that stuff.
Right. Which is why you guys follow us on Twitter or X at Russ NFL Draft, at Bischoff_Scott. But Scott, my man, welcome back. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to this. This is going to be a good one.
Yes, it is.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm great. Look, all is good over here when we're dropping mock drafts and we're talking about the guys that I've been most excited to talk about, which is offensive linemen. I just love offensive line play. From the guards and centers to the tackles, you name it. I could talk about these guys all day long. And that's what we're doing today, an in-depth interior offensive line preview for the Lions into the 2024 NFL draft. So we've got a couple of different guys each that we're going to talk about. We're going to, probably step on each other's toes a little bit, talking about some of the same stuff because we see a lot of the same stuff, but it's going to be all good. There's going to be a lot of fun conversation here. And we really want to start with 2 or 3 particular players that are guard, tackle, tweener guys. They might be better as guards. They might be tackles in the NFL. We'll see. But we're starting with 3 guys in particular, really 2 guys, and that's Graham Barton out of Duke and Jordan Morgan out of Arizona. And then we'll touch briefly on Troy Fautanu out of Washington. But let's start with the guy that I think is probably the favorite pick in mock draft simulators at pick 29, at least for me. I can't speak for you or the fan base, but I feel like he's the common one, and that's Graham Barton out of Duke. Is he a guard? Is he a tackle? Or is this guy a center? What are we going to do with Graham Barton if we took him at pick 29 or potentially moving up to get him?
So this is always one of those things that makes you kind of not question yourself, but like when I see him being talked about now, it's almost as a center, right? And he played at Duke. He played left tackle at a high level. Good player. There are flaws in his game. I looked at him in this process as a player who was going to have to go inside, but a player who had played at a high enough level that if let's say something crazy happened and one of your starting tackles was out, is he a player that you could play as a tackle and survive? And I think yes is the answer. But in a perfect world, what's his position in the NFL? And I had thought guard, and I'm seeing, like I said, I'm seeing more people project him as a center. And I wonder, because when you watch him, he's a fun player to watch, right? Mm-hmm. And he's got a nasty demeanor, and you could see rotational torque. You could see power. You can see all that stuff, and he's a good enough athlete. He's all that stuff. But there are moments where it's almost like I think he's going to be called for some penalties because he likes to sort of it's hard to describe it, but it's almost like I'm just going to grab you and we're going to just kind of hang out over here. Mm-hmm. Like, and there's not a lot of punch happening. There's not a lot of drive like leg drive. I'm talking in pass pro.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of he's not dominating people in pass pro. It's almost like he's cool to hang around with them. So I could see him as he gets to the NFL level where players are like, yeah, I don't want to be blocked, where there's going to be some holding penalties and he'll be doing some chasing, that kind of stuff. And I wonder if that's why people are projecting him as a center, because they view him as a player who's better in because of the arm length. He's got 32 7/8 arms. Better in kind of like a phone booth kind of area, shorter area player.
Yeah.
and not having to deal with defenders who are longer than him, where they're into his chest and kind of moving him around.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the mentality of why we're seeing him being pushed inside as a center.
Yeah.
I think he play guard. I do, but I see where, the flaws in his game are length, and sometimes I'm not sure how well he attaches to his blocks and moves people. But he's a really good player. I think he played at a high level at Duke. What do you think of him?
Yeah, I like him. I like him a lot, and I really don't think he's going to be there at pick 29. I look at him as one of those guys that I could see him falling perfectly in Pittsburgh with the Steelers, and it's very similar to what we saw back in, I want to say it was 2012 with David DeCastro when he was coming out of Stanford.
Yeah,
he was the 24th pick to the Steelers, plug and play, 8 or 9 years at guard. He was the pick right after, I want to say, Riley Reif, if I remember correctly, right before, I don't know. And I remember the most random stuff. And but no, I really like the player, and I really think he's a guy that I would try at tackle. I think he can finish blocks on the perimeter or off the edge, or on the edge, I should say. He shows a snatch trap technique at times, but realistically, I'm with you. He's content just kind of keeping that guy at bay. Yeah. He doesn't always try to drive him into the ground. There are times in run plays where he creates that rushing lane off his outside hip or his inside hip, and then he drives that defender into the ground with a great block. But there are times that he gets very content, and I think that's why people are like, hey, he's more of a guard, because I've kind of figured this out over time that some guys are fine tackles, but they're better inside at guard. Yes, because of arm length, but because they're better off having that tackle or that center with them to exchange those blocks and combo block and handle line stunts or blitzes. Whereas if they're on the outside on that island one-on-one, they tend to open their hips too much. They're not fast enough. The arm length gets them, whatever it is. And that's why there's always this conversation of let's take a tackle and move them to guard. So I think Barton would be a slam dunk for Detroit. I personally don't think he's going to be there at 29. I really don't. I think he's going to be off the board probably by 28. I mean, honestly, let's be honest. I if the Bills had him in front of him, I don't think they would pass on him.
There's a lot of teams that need, so that's going to be the thing in this draft. You have Miami, you have Cincinnati, you have lots of teams.
Seattle.
Where, there's a lot of need for a player like this. It's interesting because I think the arm length is not necessarily the biggest problem here. Like, I think if you move your feet, right, and you punch well, and the timing of your punch is good, I think you can survive. I mean, you mentioned Riley Reif, right? Jeff Backus, both those guys had short arms. They survived in the NFL. So I think
Backus last night.
It's because when I look at Barton, I see an interior offensive lineman with tackle feet.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
And you see, every once in a while, you'll see a little bit of the torque that he can generate on the outside. And it's like, if he can do that on the inside, you're cooking.
Right.
And I think he can. And I think it's a great point that you make. Having a player on both sides of you can really open up your game, right? So having a center to double with him or handle that inside gap while he handles the out, handle A gap while he's got B gap kind of stuff, I think matters. It would matter for him. Mm-hmm. The question then becomes, what's his fire like? And there are moments where you can see that he's got power and he'll move dudes. Mm-hmm. But then there are moments where it's like, he's cool just kind of hanging there. So it's just, it gives me a little pause as a tackle. But inside, I think he's much better. I do think more pause for me comes from seeing some of these, some other people project him as a center, where I think the Lions are needing they need somebody who can step in and play guard now. They need a tackle in the future. They're going to need a tackle in the future. So the idea of drafting a player who can play tackle down the road is great.
Right.
But somebody needs to play guard now, right? And then with Ragnow's injuries piling up, there's that center component of things. So we're going to talk about some guard center players in a bit. But for me, this is, I get it. I could see people liking this player. I think, when you play enough at a place like Duke, the way he played, good enough. He's 6'5". He's got a weird build. He's 6'5", 313 pounds with sub 33-inch arms. Right. So he's tall, plenty tall enough. Yeah.
It's interesting. Like his top pro comparison on mockdraftable.com, which is a great website for comparing measurables on a player during the draft process. Now, it's not his top one, but one of the 5 or 6 is Brian Bulaga. And, it makes me wonder, like, he was the 23rd pick back in like 2010, 11, something like that.
Yeah.
And he went to the Packers, and I think he was like the last Packer first round pick, if I remember correctly, as an offensive lineman. I don't think they've drafted one since him. Yeah. But no, like Barton he's had a really weird offseason too. Like he was supposed to be at the Senior Bowl, didn't go, accepted the invite, all that stuff. I think he even measured there, interviewed with teams, but didn't work out, wasn't on the field. Combine didn't work out. So I think he was dealing with some type of injury, and that's why we haven't seen much with him. But the versatility is obviously number one with him. He can play anywhere. He does a lot of tackle over stuff. So he's a no-brainer at 29 if he's there, like we've talked about. And I will say, if he goes to the Lions, I'm screwed, because I'm going to mix him and Graham Glasgow up all day long. I've done it in mock drafts.
I got no room to be talking about getting names wrong.
Yeah.
But I think one thing to remember for people is that we're talking about pick 29.
Right.
So we're not talking about, pick 5 or 7 in this class where you're getting the elite tackles. Whoever you're getting at 29 is there at 29 for a reason. Mm-hmm. So there's going to we're talking about him and bringing up some stuff that he does that you don't necessarily like. That's why he's available at 29. Right. Exactly. So Lions fans have to remember that, taking Aiden Hutchinson second overall, it was awesome. And there's a reason he went second overall, right? Some of these players are going to have some flaws that you have to resolve, or they have to resolve. And one of the things I think that right now, their coaching is spectacular. And, if you bring an offensive lineman, I don't care which position you bring in, he's going to get better.
Yep.
With their coaching. Yep. So whatever we're seeing where we might think there are some flaws, we have to recognize that there's a good chance that some of these players are going to get better quickly. Right. But we're looking at what we're seeing now. So it's something to think about.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's going to make the offensive tackle episode that we do so much more interesting, because I think there's a couple of offensive tackles that need some work and need some development. And if they fell into the Lions' lap like, Amarius Mims or J.C. Latham, I don't know if Latham actually does. He seems to be getting a lot of traction as of late. Yeah. But if one of those guys fell, I could see them sprinting to the podium for him because of the size and what you get and the development that you get out of them. But another guy that could fall into that realm of possibilities is Jordan Morgan, the interior offensive lineman or tackle, depending on who you're talking to, out of Arizona. And he's kind of similar to Graham Barton in a way. He's kind of a tackle, but he might be a guard. I don't necessarily know what we do with him at the next level, but oddly enough, same arm length as Graham Barton, 32 7/8. I view him as
same build as 6'5" and 311 for Morgan. It's the same body.
Yeah, I think Morgan's more of a guard. I don't know what you take of him, so I would have wrote him down as a guard for me.
So he is, because I think he's passive, where Barton can be aggressive at times. Mm-hmm. I would try him as a tackle with an expectation that he might have to move inside.
Yep.
And I would really cross my fingers and hope that he makes it as a tackle, because I don't know. I don't know. So this is going to go into like what kind of systems are you running? But if you're running a lot of power, I don't know that I'm not sure that Jordan Morgan is a guard for that sort of system. But if you're looking at Miami and that wide zone stuff or San Francisco, he's athletic enough to help you in a variety of ways. So this is Lions specific. I don't know that, I don't know that I would love him as a guard in the Lions system for what the Lions do. But he's super athletic. He can move his feet. It's one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier just about if you can move your feet, it doesn't matter how long your arms are if you don't move your feet well. It's not relevant, right? You're going to get beat.
Yep.
He moves his feet well enough that I think he can survive with the arm length, and he's a fine player. It's just, is he a player that you're gonna slot as a tackle, and all right, we're good to go? I don't know. He's a tough one to figure out. I see him as more passive than Barton, where I think he's better in pass pro. I think he's got better feet than Barton does. But I don't know that there's as much fire and power that you're going to get from Barton. I don't know if you're going to get that out of Morgan. So he's an interesting player. He really is. What are your thoughts on him?
I really like Jordan Morgan, but I think he's more of a guard simply because he bends too much at the waist for my liking. I thought the way he bent at the waist was more comparable to like a Jonah Jackson, just really kind of leaning over and more so like lunging. They didn't really sit and prepare to anchor. I prefer out of an offensive tackle. I mean, I have a preference for certain players and certain types. So that's why, and everybody sees it differently. But I think he opens his hips a little bit too much with edge rushers. It allows them to turn the corner on him. The bend at the waist is a little concerning, and it leads to him, I think, to play a little bit slower. And that might
just stance related at all with him, because his stance is real funky.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. But I wonder, like, is it that's how he's taught, or is it the injuries that he has sustained over the course of his career? Because it's the weirdest thing. He's 22 years old. He's started 37 games at Arizona, but he's dealt with a torn ACL and a high ankle sprain. And it's like, how is this guy only 22, has suffered those injuries, played that much football? So that's my only concern. He's still young. I think you can still mold him a little bit, but I think he falls into that kind of Graham Barton category of like, I think he can play tackle, but with the way his stance is and the way he leans and the troublesome with the speed and turning his hips a little bit, or opening his hips, I should say, he, to me, is better between a center and a tackle. And I think in Detroit, it could definitely work. Like if they were to trade back and take him at, let's say, like we did in the mock draft at like pick 35, I think it's a home run pick because he can sit with Graham Glasgow for a year, learn, become a very feasible left guard for the future if he can stay healthy. But I think there's a lot to be intrigued with him. He's got heavy hands, strong hands, huge hands. I mean, they're 11 inches, like some of the biggest hands of any.
There are things about his game that, I mean, there are things that he does that you like that are tough to teach.
Yes.
And that pick, again, it's pick 29. So it's like, you're getting a player who might be able to play tackle at the NFL level. That's you're getting him at pick 29, right? So, if you just bury him between, I mean, the idea of playing him between Taylor Decker and Ragnow is pretty good. Yeah, good thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I compared him to Jonah Jackson. I mean, I had to throw one at him, and that was the player that just kept popping in my head. And I mean, just comparing the numbers, I'll do a kind of real quick for people. I mean, you mentioned it. Morgan was 6'5", 311. And then you go to Jonah Jackson, and I don't think he was 6'5", but he was 6'3", 306, 33-inch arms. Similar, bigger hands. I mean, 10.5 size hands, and there's not much you can do from a vertical jump standpoint. 26 inches for Jonah Jackson and 28 for Jordan Morgan. But I really like the player. I think he's a fun guy. That's that guard tackle tweener, and the Lions might put some value there. They're looking for probably a swing tackle guard in this draft. You'd have to think at this point with kind of how we've talked in depth of the offensive line and the way it currently sits.
Yeah, and so that's going to be there. There's a large component of all this stuff. Are the Lions looking for a guard tackle combo, or are they looking for a guard center combo?
Right.
And I think you could make the argument that they need both, right? Like, I mean, Taylor Decker is getting older. He's realistically on the last year of his deal. I could see them extending him for maybe 3 years or whatever it is, and sort of resolving the tackle issue that way. But it's never a bad thing to be adding players who can play multiple positions. It's just, where are they? And we don't know this. But we'll know on draft night.
Yep.
Where are they? Are they looking for more, like I said, guard tackles, or are they looking for? I'm certain that they're looking for players that give them the positional versatility to do multiple things.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they love a player, and we're going to get to some of the pure guards in a second. But I think that he would be a very nice player at 29, or in a trade back kind of thing. He does have enough movement abilities, and he, like you said, he does have very heavy hands. So when he gets there and when he's right, it's good, right?
Yeah.
It's just, there's an element of not staying square with his upper body,
mm-hmm.
in his kick slide, where you kind of you've softened your shoulder, your outside shoulder yourself, and made it easier for the defensive end to turn on you.
Yeah.
Where you want to stay square and make it hard, make it tough.
Right.
But that's all little technical things where, again, pick 29, really good players, solid players, had a really good career.
Mm-hmm.
Well, reasonable.
Yeah, and the Lions have one of the best offensive line coaches in football. It doesn't get talked about enough. I mean, what Hank Fraley's able to do with some of these guys it's pretty remarkable. I mean, he is
100%. I would expect. Yes,
he's developed a bunch of dudes. I mean, they've brought in veterans, and he's found success with those guys too. Like, he has really done a great job with everything that's in front of them with this offensive line, and really from where they were from the days of Matthew Stafford to now, it's just remarkable. And he should get a lot of credit for that success. But yeah, you mentioned we're going to talk about more guards and things like that. We absolutely are, but we wanted to kind of break it up a little bit, get a break in the action, pay some of the bills, and talk about our friends over at Restore. And you know what that means. It's Prospect of the Week, powered by Restore Hyper Wellness. You guys already know about them, but if you don't, you're new here, let me tell you about them. Restore Hyper Wellness. Maybe you're an athlete. Maybe you've got a child like myself that's an athlete, and you're spending time in the gym with those kids, or they're spending time in the gyms, or just yourself, whatever it is, and you're just not recovering like you used to. Well, I've got a solution for you. Go check out our friends over at Restore Hyper Wellness here in Northville and Birmingham, Michigan. It's a wonderful facility, and you should spend time getting your body right by visiting Restore. They've got everything you need, from compressions to cryotherapy, even specialty services such as IV drip therapy. After just one visit, I promise you will feel better and you will be hooked once you go in there. So they've got tons of special offers right now, things such as 2 cryotherapy sessions for $30, or you can save 50% on your first IV and a whole lot more. That includes anywhere from 10 to 20% off if you drop our name here at the Detroit Lions podcast. So tell them I sent you from the Detroit Lions podcast so they can take care of you and get you back and doing more of what you love. Don't wait around. Go check out Restore Hyper Wellness now. So, Prospect of the Week. I know you've got a guy that you're pretty excited about. I'm excited to actually talk about him because we haven't talked about a lot of defensive backs on the show, and we both got a defensive back to talk about. So who's the guy that you got?
Cooper DeJean, however you want to say his name, from Iowa. I should know this. But at least I know his name. So we're getting better, taking positive steps in knowing names for the day. So he's an interesting player. He's pretty positive. I mean, there's a lot of positive buzz about him last year at a point, and he had a bad injury. I think when you look at him, you can see the punt return stuff, you can see the special team stuff, and obviously that's a big deal, right? And it's important for a player like him who might come to the Lions as a developmental type of player, and his path to getting on the field is going to be as a punt returner immediately. and as a gunner on special teams. But I want to say he's in the 6 foot 200 205 range, plenty big enough as a safety. He's got good ball skills. He's been productive throughout his career, getting his hands on passes. He is a player that will hit you. I think he has played as a box safety in the past, so it's not just that he's a corner. I would project him more as a safety than a corner, though. And I know that there's a lot of talk about him being a safety because that's kind of what he did at Iowa. But to me, his hips are tight, and I would not want him. I wouldn't want him turning his hips, flipping his hips, and moving away from the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
To me, this is a guy who needs to play in a zone type of system where his eyes are looking at the quarterback, and he's got great instincts. He's got all this stuff, but let his eyes get him to the ball. And if I think he's a very linear athlete.
Yeah.
So I think he's like I don't want to say he's a it's like a build up, height, weight, speed guy, but he's definitely more linear where if you introduce change of direction for him, I think that's asking him to do things that he's maybe not great at. Mm-hmm. But if you're telling him to come forward on plays and use his eyes to find the ball, that's winning football for him. And he's exciting in that regard. He can hit. There's a lot of interesting stuff that he does. It's just, I think he needs to be deployed in a specific way. I'm kind of curious what you think of him as a player.
I'm very much in agreement with you. I think he's more of a safety. I think teams are going to, whoever drafts him is going to try him at the cornerback spot. But I think he's best suited to play zone coverage where he's in cover 3 or quarters coverage. If he plays safety, he might be the middle of the third, middle third type player, or he could have those dual safety roles as well. But I like the way he comes up. I like the way he can cover in the slot. And that might be more of his role. He might be more of a nickel. I think he can match up well against tight ends and slot receivers. Yeah. Running backs out of the backfield. I thought there was a lot of good plays on tape where he would come up and blitz out of the slot. So I like the player quite a bit. And I don't think we've talked enough about him, not necessarily us, but just as a fan base of him being a potential option at 29 and being a realistic option at 29. Because if he's there, they've gone to the Iowa well a couple of times here over the years for players. We saw it last year. Could they do it here? I think it makes some sense. So I think they could fall in love with the player. I mean, he's a multi-sport athlete. He was a guy that, on the basketball court, forget about it. Basically a walking triple-double. The only downside to him is that he, broke his leg, but he's a heck of a player. And I think he was somebody that, the Lions would probably have taken had he, like a lock to be talked about had he be, healthy during this process. But
totally agree. And I think the positional, the versatility to do a bunch of things makes him more valuable.
Yeah.
And the Lions love that kind of stuff. And I know we both do too. I love the idea of him returning punts for you.
Yeah.
Because that's just speed, like catch ball, go. Right.
Yeah. Well, and when you think about what the Lions had to do later in the year, the shuffling that they had back there, they had, I love Khalif Raymond. Khalif Raymond's one of my favorite Lions on the roster. I want him to be a Lion for the rest of his career. But when he went down with the knee injury, I can't speak for anybody else, but I was not comfortable with Donovan Peoples-Jones back there recovering punt. Give me Cooper back there doing this because I feel a lot comfortable. So a lot more comfortable. But
yeah. And then as a gunner on special teams, on punt and kick coverage.
Yeah.
And then
put him and JMO out there.
Yeah. But that's it. That's it in a nutshell. The Lions love those guys.
Yep.
One of the reasons I know they were attracted to JMO is because of watching him play on special teams. And if you don't love football, you don't play on special teams the way those guys do. Right? Like that's a tell. So I think DeJean would be a really nice option as long as the expectation was not for him to come in and play corner and play man in a man type of system where you're asking him to press and then flip his hips and run with receivers, that is just not. I just don't see that as the strength of his game. I would want him playing more. I want him to use his eyes and to come up and make plays in front of that are happening in front of him. That's what I'd want him to do.
No, I'm with you. 100%. The player I got for Prospect of the Week is Ines Rakestraw from Missouri. I might be saying his name wrong. I don't know.
You got it.
5'11", 183 pounds. One of those types of players that has long arms, 32 inches, which is really good for a player that's going to be a press man corner. He's going to jam and use those long arms to jam receivers and redirect them at the line of scrimmage. I think the production for him over the last 4 years has been really solid for the position. He's really fluid with his lateral movement and the lateral transitions from him. I think he can open his hips and run with receivers really well. I think he's physical and competitive at the catch point, but the physicality can get him in trouble. He tends to get a little too grabby. I think he drifts quite a bit in zone coverage. So if I put him in cover 3 or quarters coverage or even, cover 2, I think he'll be okay. But those other two are big ones in the NFL. I think he drifts a little bit there and is out of position. And then the injuries are just a concern. I mean, this is a guy that has dealt with a groin injury, an ACL injury in his career, but he's played a lot of football. He'll be 23 years of age. He reminds me a little bit of Emmanuel Mosley. So if he was a guy that the Lions had some intrigue as a borderline first round pick, or they moved back and took him, I think he's a day 2 pick somewhere in the top 60 of this draft. I think the only way he drops at all is because teams are afraid of the 4-5 time in the 40, just because he got the press man. Can he recover? And then the injuries. Is there anything there in the medicals that's a big red flag for teams? So if he drops, it's, I think, because of those things. But I could see the Lions taking a like for him just because he fits schematically. And I think the physicality is going to be a big bonus to him. And I think the Lions are in search of a CB3 with the veterans that they already have with Carlton Davis and Robertson and stuff like that. You bring in that CB3 to develop. You have somebody for the future with Cam Sutton's situation. I think this makes a lot of sense to bring in Rakestraw if they wanted to go that route. But I have a couple of other guys that I would, to me personally, much rather have, but they just didn't grade out the same.
Yeah, and I think what stands. I think so. There was a discussion long before the combine, and media people loved Rakestraw, and I think he was widely thought of as a first round pick, and he was in that conversation to be in the top 20 range because he tackles. He will come up and hit you, and some of that stuff's hard to find. Some corners just don't like to tackle like that. He does. Yeah. He will. Yep. And for a smaller guy, I worry about what's the long-term prognosis of a guy who hits the way he hits.
Right.
At 180 and, around 180 pounds, 185 pounds, what does it look like in the long term? But definitely from a schematic standpoint, he matches what the Lions want to do on defense. From a man coverage standpoint, and getting involved tackling. Yeah. And, as long as it's not, I think that he's slotting right about where he should be if we're talking about him, in the back end of, say, round 2 as a day 2 player. Yeah. I think it's fine. But, I think there was a little bit of overhype with him just because he'll come in and hit the shit out of you.
Yeah.
And it's
hard, man. He's physical.
Yeah. He's very physical. And it's, from the corner position, you don't always see that. So he stood out from the crowd just because of how physical he is.
Yeah. No, yeah, I'm with you. I think these were both, really solid players to discuss as our prospect of the week, because we've been watching them, and, we shift away from interior offensive linemen, starting to get into the defensive backfield. And I think Rakestraw and DeJean and a couple of other guys, maybe TJ Tampa, Cam Hart, and some of these guys down the road are players that we'll talk about on the show. So let's get back into it. Talking about Lions interior offensive line preview. Had to pay some bills there, but jumping to just strictly guards only. We talked about Graham Barton and Jordan Morgan, but one guy that in particular seems to always pop up in the conversation is Cooper Beebe of Kansas State. how do you feel about him as a guard center, possibly? I think you like him more as a guard, though.
I think he's a guard. I would want him to stay as a guard. He plays left guard right now, and it is so easy just to say this is what he does.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have an opening if you need somebody to play left guard for you, plug and play, done, sold.
Yep.
Right. And it's not that there aren't things that there's some stuff that he has to work on,
mm-hmm.
but from a physicality standpoint, from a strength and power standpoint, he's got everything, right? He's good in pass pro. He'll move you. Kansas State runs a lot of power concepts. So if you want to see a player who gets pulled and and they run behind him, you can see that with Kansas State. He'll come across the formation and kick out an end. There's a lot of things that he does that are super exciting if you're an O-line fan. Mm-hmm. Where you just a lot of the next group of players we're going to talk about this is great O-line stuff. He's 22 years old, 6'3" and 320 pounds. He is built for power. He has short arms.
Yeah,
super short,
very short,
31.5-inch arms. So, but to me, it's like it doesn't matter so much because he's so powerful. Even if he gives up his chest, he's okay. He's just so powerful. So mm-hmm. I think he'll have some issues with some of the bigger, stronger guards. Tackles in the NFL. He's going to have some issues with those guys, and obviously the super quick ones are going to give him some issues too. But there isn't a player that every single player we would talk about at pick 29 is going to have some issues with, like, just what are they going to do against? How would they block Aaron Donald? Well, you'd be asking for help, right?
Yeah, right. Any player would, any guard.
Yeah. It just is what it is. But there's so much to like about his game and just the straight up power in which he plays and his quickness, his foot movements, all that stuff. I think he is. If the Lions want to get super, I don't want to say conservative, it's the wrong word, but if they want to just take the best available player for the one hole on their offensive line and plug and play that guy right now, to me, it might be Cooper Beebe because he plays left guard and that's what they need.
Yeah, no, I have another left guard that I think is, or maybe he's a right guard, but more of a plug and play guy. But I'm with you on Cooper Beebe, and I think I don't like doing this with players, like scout the helmet and compare players from the same school. But like, I just think back to, 2018 or 2019 with Dalton Reisner when he came out of Kansas State. He was a little bit more versatile, but he was a plug and play guard. And he's, first and foremost, let me just say, great guy, still available in the free agent market, which is, I'm a little surprised at. I mean, he started like 80 games in his career so far, but you get a plug and play guy. And if you can get that plug and play start for you for 5, 6, maybe 7 years at that guard spot as a day 2 pick, that's a win for you. If you get those 70 plus starts at a relatively high level, and I think Beebe does that for the Lions if he ends up falling into our lap. I love watching him pull. I love the nastiness that he plays with downfield. I think that the biggest question mark with him is just the arms. I don't think anybody expected his arms to come in sub 32 inches, which is, I mean, that's short. I mean, to put it to compare it, the pass rusher out of UCLA, Gabriel Murphy, who I was talking about a little bit before the show, and I've talked about on the show quite a bit. One of my favorite players in this draft because of the way he plays, but he's got 30-inch arms. Like, I don't know what you do with that as a pass rusher at the next level, but to compare, I mean, like that.
You better be quick.
Right. Him and Cooper Beebe, though, in a phone booth could lock each other out and just hold there and stand still. Right. Exactly, dude.
T-Rexes.
Yeah. So it'd be like an episode of Jurassic Park. Like, it just would be something else. So I really like Beebe, though. And I think as a day 2 pick, absolutely, I would be stunned if he slipped out by any means. I mean, there's been discussions of him being a potential first-round pick. So we'll see what happens with them. I mean, we've seen odd things happen with interior offensive linemen, though, over the years, like Creed Humphrey. He lasted to the Chiefs late into the second round. That was criminal. So, like, could Cooper Beebe fall that far down the board? Maybe. He might fall right into the Lions' lap at 61, you know? So
I'd be stunned, but they seem to be that team that is having good fortune. Like the Red Wings have been the team that have just gotten pounded for in the lottery process. I mean, and I mean pounded in a bad way. The Lions have gotten good fortune for a while, like like the Sewell stuff, and just who knows? I mean, we don't know. I think that because he's 22 years old, he's played a lot. I can't imagine him being around at 61. I would think that he would be a player that you would, in the mock drafts we did, you trade back 3, 4, 5 spots. That if they do something as awesome as we did, it just sounds ridiculous. If they do that,
they were as cool as us.
If they were as smart, as us, I'm kidding. But seriously, the point is, if you're moving back, or even if you take him at 29, and they walk to the podium and they say, the offensive line was the strength of our team before tonight, and it just got better.
Right.
Okay, I'm in. I'm all in, right?
Right.
And I think that's the point that we're trying to make with this entire group. And when we get to the tackles, is the idea that some of these players are in the long term going to help you. Some of the players are just not going to be available because they're going to be gone. But BB, I think it makes sense because he is like one of the guys who plays a position of need, and he reminds me a lot. And I know Lance Zierlein has the same comp of Zeitler, and just the left side of a version of that. So
right,
a guy who's going to play for a long time, be super steady. He's not going to make a lot of mistakes. He's physically up to it. Right. Yep. It's just, you got to live with some of the short arms stuff. But to me, I'm not sure that it matters all that much because he's playing in a short area, and he's just, you're asking him to just muddy it up.
Yeah.
It's great. And Kansas State's an easy one if anybody's watching and they want to watch how a player like BB could translate and transition for the Lions run a lot of the same kind of plays where, the pulling and a lot of the concepts they run are right there in front of your eyes to see it.
Yeah. Yep.
He's an easy, I don't want to say he's an easy player to eval, but he kind of is, because it's just, this is what he is. This is what he's really good at doing.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, he would be a nice option.
Yeah, no, it's one of those gap zone scheme type of guy, can play multiple things, and I think he fits that. And I think the next player I want to talk about, and I know you do as well, to me, he's the best pure guard in the draft. There is no, you play him at center, you're playing him at tackle. No, this is a plug and play guard to me, and that's Christian Haynes out of UConn. I just love this kid. One of my favorite players in the draft. He to me, it sounds crazy. I could see him sneaking into the back end of the first round. Not saying the Lions at 29, but you look at the teams that are after Detroit, and you look at the 49ers. What's an emphasis for them? Run the football.
Yeah.
Cheap, not necessarily, but maybe. Baltimore at 30. He screams Baltimore Raven. We just took their starting right guard.
Yes.
This is the type of player that screams to me Baltimore Raven at pick 30, but I don't want to just say that on Twitter and get blasted, but I love Christian Haynes. I just think the physicality, the way he fires out of his stance, I mean, he is a
total dude.
Yes.
He is just a dude. What did he look like in Mobile?
The same way he looked on tape. I mean, he just dominates. He flashed so much down there consistently, whether it be in one-on-ones. He's stout against the run. He's stout against the pass. He's only, he's a sub 6'3" guy. He's 6'2" and 3/4. I compared him to Nate Davis when he was coming out of Charlotte.
Yeah.
But he's just one of those guys that is consistent when climbing to the linebackers. He seals off defenders there. He creates rushing lanes consistently. You watch him get up out in space. I think it's great. I think his hands are a little inconsistent as far as placement. I think he gets a little bit wide. The outside hand kind of grabs that back shoulder pad a little bit, but
yeah,
He's experienced. I mean, 49 straight games on the interior for the Huskies. He's a former wrestler. I mean, the Bills, Sean McDermott, they love wrestlers. He could be an option there at 28. Like, it sounds crazy, but this guy's a top 50 pick. I mean, he truly is. He's going to be.
I don't think it sounds crazy at all. I think the things that he does well, he moves well. He's powerful. He is, to me, he's an explosive hitter. I don't mean hitter. He's an explosive blocker. He is, I think he's reliable enough in pass pro in both ways, like in both facets of the game where he is a high level player. Yeah. And I think he's comparable to BB. Like, it just depends on kind of what you're looking for. I would say that Haynes moves better than BB does. So I think you'll get better fits at the second. I could be wrong on this, but I think you'll get better fits at the second level with Haynes than you would with BB. I think BB might win a little more at the line of scrimmage, though. And it's a weird way to look at it. It's like, take care of the line of scrimmage and then get to the second level. But a lot of what the Lions do is the blocks are at the second level. That's where the real meat is with some of their run designs. So he is one of the few guys where you kind of try to hide your fanboy stuff, because I mean, I'm not doing a good job of hiding it right now. I think
I'm not hiding at all. Good thing this is a waist up podcast, because nobody wants to see that.
Yeah. He's definitely, like, I mean, the age thing, I knew he was older. You told me earlier he's 25. I don't know if that's a factor for them at all, but yeah, I love his game. I think he would be one of those guys where fans would be like, you took a guard at 29. Yes, that's a great thing. Right. He's that guy. And, I think it's the same way with BB. It's the same kind of stuff, but they're different players, but they both are, high level, competes. I think Haynes just is different than a lot of other guards in this class because of his ability to move.
Yeah.
And then when he gets to a certain place, just the destruction that happens there. He's going to get to blocks. I'll just put it simple. He's going to get to blocks that I don't think other guards can get to. Like, I wouldn't expect BB to get to certain places on the field where I think Haynes can.
Yeah.
And I could see them drawing them to Haynes. Like, we want the high level, second level stuff. He's a great prospect. Very fun to watch.
Yeah. And one of his top, comparisons from the measurables on Mock Draftable is Chris Snee, which I found interesting just simply because Snee was the 34th pick back in 2004, played like 11 or 12 years with the Giants, started 141 games with 141 games played. So, I mean, I think it's just interesting when you see those numbers. But as I fanboy about one of my guys that obviously you like as well, I want to go to one of your guys, and that is Mason McCormick from South Dakota State, who, this is your boy all day long. You were the first one to tell me about him. And then like 2 days after you told me about him, Twitter blew up on him. He had a great Shrine Week. And I'm like, who is this kid? But you know more about this guy, which, by the way, the pro day for South Dakota State was supposed to be today on Monday. They moved it to Wednesday because of bad weather. But go on.
There's the next two guys. Actually, the next three guys we're going to talk about are all dudes as well, right? So there's a trend here. Mason McCormick, South Dakota State. I think he could play center and guard. I love the versatility for what he offers. We all have to recognize that Ragnow is on almost like a game to game situation that, where you just don't know. And the injuries are piling up, and he's one of the best centers, if not the best center in football, with Kelsey retiring. He's a phenomenal player. I mean, he's an incredible player, but they cannot pigeonhole themselves. And I think this is where the Graham Glasgow signing was smart, is that right now you're okay. Like, you're okay in the short term, because Glasgow can play center for you. He can, and you know what you've got with him. But in the long term, you don't have anything in the pipeline, and there's some questions about, what happens if Ragnow does suffer something crazy. I mean, he had the craziest injuries happened last year. He got leg whipped, and I think he tore his meniscus. And just, dude's tough as could possibly be, but these injuries are piling up. So when I look at a guy like McCormick, I see a guy who I feel very comfortable. And I know he's a small school young man, should say kid. He's a small school guy. But I think when you look at the build and then the movement ability, we've talked on this show about the running under the 4.47 short shuttle time for interior offensive linemen. And if you find players that do that, draft them because they generally work. He hit that. He ran 4.45. So he hit that number. Now, I know I sound like a total nerd talking about that. But it's not just that. It's the demeanor in which he plays. It's the position versatility stuff. He moves like a rare guy. I mean, he just does. It's hard to find interior offensive linemen who move the way he does. And then it's the badass demeanor. And the nice thing about him is that he's not going to cost you pick 29.
No.
I think he would cost you, somewhere between 60, is it 61 and 73? I should know this.
Yep, you're right.
Like, so somewhere in that range. Like, if you walked away and you felt like you overdrafted him a half a round because you took him at pick 61, I'm going to be doing I'm not going to say what I have very bad thoughts entering my brain and they're not going to come out of my mouth. But
don't do it.
Guy where it's like, I would be so excited for him as a player because I think he is, there's enough physicality, there's enough movement ability. You can see it. And I know it's against lesser competition. I know it is, but the nuts and bolts of it are you play against who you play. And if you're going to be a small school player who gets drafted early-ish, you better have dominated your competition. And he does. And he just, the way he moves, he makes it look easy. And he's just got this sort of badass mentality about the way he carries himself and his demeanor and all that stuff. I love him as a player. I would love for the Lions to take him at the end of round 2 and just settle in on this is a dude who's going to play for us at some position, whether it's right guard, center, or left guard. He can play all of them. Good to go for a while. Phenomenal.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I think he's, you do these mock draft simulators or you see mock draft pictures or whatever, and you don't really see his name brought up until like the picks in the hundreds. And I feel very confident saying that he's going to be a top 100 pick, and he's probably going to be like a top 85 type player, top 75. A lot of the stuff is it sounds more and more by the day that he's a late second, early third round pick for teams. And I think that's going to end up being true. I think with how he had a great combine workout, 35.5-inch vertical is insane. 98th percentile for that position. And you add in just his overall size with almost 34-inch arms. Probably, as we talk about Graham Barton as versatility, I think McCormick is as versatile as they come. I think he could play anywhere on the offensive line and find success because he's that type of player. Is there going to be some limitations at tackle compared to guard or center? Yeah, probably. But at the end of the day, he is a guy that fits Detroit so well, and I would be thrilled with him at 61 or 73.
Yeah, the idea of running power behind him is like, please,
right?
It just is. So, dude,
it's almost like if the Lions,
my heart rate's it's getting too high,
right? But if the Lions followed this, they could almost create we see this all the time: interior defensive line rotations and rotations at defensive end. The Lions do it all the time. One defensive series, it's Kaminsky and Hutch, and then the next it's Pascal and Levi and whatever.
Yeah.
The Lions could create almost an interior offensive line rotation if they played their cards right by drafting a player like this, because Glasgow, Ragnow, somebody could take a couple plays off and you could bring in a McCormick and utilize.
We saw last year, how many combinations of offensive line did they go with last year because of injuries?
Right.
So it's not like, I know we've talked about the interior O-line for a while, people. It's probably driving people nuts because it's like, there are other positions of need, but I don't know if there's anything as important to their quarterback as keeping him comfortable and clean. And, I don't know right now that yes, you have a right tackle who's awesome. Left tackle's a really good player. Center's awesome. And then it's like, okay, you let Jonah Jackson walk. You've got Zeitler for a year. So you're comfortable at the right guard position. And you've got Graham Glasgow, who is a center guard combo.
Yeah.
And I just think you need to keep adding, because at some point in time, the older players, what happens if Zeitler gets hurt and misses time? You gave him a bunch of money, but like, you can't just settle in on, well, I guess we'll just throw, Colby Sorsdale in there and hope it works.
Yeah.
I think he's a developmental guy, but some of the players that we're talking about here, I think are serious upgrades from what they currently have, and also upgrades on their depth, which is really important for their specific offensive line.
Yeah, and the Lions don't feel like a team that want to be kind of pigeonholed with developmental guys behind the established players that they have. Like you mentioned, if Zeitler goes down, it's possible he's 34 years old. He has started 181 games. Like, at some point, something might happen there. I hope not. I hope he's there for all 16, 17 games next year.
I do too. But, you've got an older right guard. You've got an older backup at guard center. You've got a center who's dealing with significant injury concerns.
Right.
I think the interior O-line is more pressing than we think.
Exactly.
And,
which is why we've talked about it.
Yeah.
Because we genuinely think in our gut that that's a realistic option at pick 29. Like, it would not surprise me if that was the pick. And the next player I want to talk about could very well be that guy. And that's Zach Frazier out of West Virginia. I know we got Jackson Powers Johnson on the list as well, but Zach Frazier, the West Virginia kid, there's so much to like with this guy. Obviously his wrestling ability is what stands out the most, but what do you think of him as a player? And ultimately, is he the guy that we should maybe start talking about more of at pick 29?
Yeah. Yeah. I think he is. It's a little Cooper Beebe like, where, and you'd have no concerns saying we're starting the season with him starting for us as our left guard. You just wouldn't.
Yeah.
And he's played both guard and center in the past for long stretches of time.
Yep.
You're comfortable with them. You mentioned the wrestling. It's so important that interior guys know how to move people. Right. And when you bring in like the wrestling background of things, it's very obvious he knows how to move people. It just is. He is a fun player to watch because of the nastiness of which he will take players to the ground and finish almost like over like that. All right, that's over the top, but it's not. That's just his mentality is to finish a player's attempt to make a play by putting them on their back and laying on them, right? Yeah. Or other things. So, I think that he is a physically dominant player. It would be, we mentioned with Beebe, I would say it with Haynes. It's not going to be the sexiest pick that there is, simply because it's a guard. But it's really important for, we just talked for a few minutes about their situation with their older players. This is he's 22. He measured 6'3", 313, plenty of size, plenty of power. He's a very highly polished player. I think of all the guards who they would consider in round one, the guards, and I'm not talking in this scenario, I'm not talking about Jackson Powers Johnson, because I think he's a center, but he can play guard too. But I think he's super polished player. But Frazier is as polished as it gets from a play style standpoint. I think there are some flaws with like some of the things that BB does, and Christian Haynes is older, right? And we're nitpicking at this point. But
Right.
if they get to the podium and they call Frazier's name, really, really excellent football player, takes one of the strengths of your team and makes it better.
Yeah.
Both in the short term and the long term. Yeah. It gives you some position versatility, which I think is great. I would love it. It's a great pick. I know we're like, sometimes this is just how it is. Like in this particular class, there are like 15 offensive linemen who might go in the first 2 rounds in that range where you would say, yeah, it's a really good player. Love him. Yeah. Love the prospect, right? Yeah. He's one of those guys where it's just like, there's not a lot to dislike about the way he plays.
To me, offensive tackle and interior offensive line is the best group in this draft. By far, hands and away, the best. And I know we want to talk about the receivers because of the top of the draft, but then when we get through the top of the draft, we kind of fall into the categories of just some dudes. Like, let's not forget, if you go back and look at previous drafts at wide receiver, you go back to CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase and those top-heavy draft. Then you go a little bit further down the list, a lot of guys I liked on that draft, and they're not really doing much, where with these offensive linemen, you're getting 60, 70, 80 games out of them, maybe even a second contract to get to 100 plus games. And that's important when we're talking about the success of our offense, because we all know it. Your offense isn't scoring without these players. And I think Zach Frazier is a great one. I really do. I think he's a second round pick as far as overall grading. I'm glad that you mentioned playing with plenty of power and just driving defenders into the ground. That was the first thing I wrote down about him in his strengths column. I think he keeps his head on a swivel very well. His eyes are up when handling line stunts and blitzes. There are times like, remember that play of Quentin Nelson years ago when he just left side just blows a guy up?
How did you see it? Yes. Yeah.
Frazier does some of that at times. And it's like, how did he know that was going to happen? I think he's a great pre-snap communicator. I think he shows good consistency with anchoring and rolling his hips. He's kind of got that traditional pass blocker to him, like really sit, roll your hips, and just try to and steer and drive that guy. I love seeing
his leg
that.
Drive is like, BB's is too, Haynes is too, the leg drive, just the power that these guys play with. It's awesome. And if you're an O-line guy like we both are, man, like it's fun to watch.
Well, and I think at times his lower body can become a little lethargic. Like as the game goes on, he kind of wears down a little bit, tends to lean on guys, and I think it hurts him laterally. His hands could become a little bit faster off the snap, and the arm length is obviously going to be a thing, right? Because it's 32 and a quarter. So that'll be a thing. But I think for a team looking for a guard center, probably more of a center, this is the guy. I mean, his dad played college football at Fairmont State. He was 159-2 in wrestling, started 37 games at center, 37 straight games at center, started 9 games at left guard in 2020. Again, wrestler, track and field guy, multi-sport athletes. That's important. And I think Frazier is just a plug and play guy. So certainly on the cards at 29. The next player is certainly in the cards at 29 if he's there, but I don't think he's going to be there, which is why I kind of saved him for probably the end here. And that's Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon. I mean, we talk plug and play. This is that guy. There's so much to love with him, but I just don't think he's going to be there at 29. And I don't know if he's a realistic option for the Lions unless they are intrigued enough to maybe trade up for him. I don't know what you think of JPJ as a player, but I think he's great. I really do. I think he's probably the best interior offensive lineman in the draft, right?
Yeah. Yes, I think he is. And I think he's different than the rest of them. We're going to call him JPJ because at some point in time, I'm going to call him Johnny Powers Jimmy or something ridiculous. I'm just not going to know it. And I wish it was different, but it is what it is. Like,
no, it's fair.
Powers Johnson, right? So, I think he can play guard, he can play center, he can play wherever you want on the interior. You can talk to what it looked like in Mobile. His ability to recover is crazy.
Yeah.
Obviously, you need to recover a little bit less as a center than you do as a guard, than you do as a tackle. So it matters more the further you get away from the ball. But just from the overall game, power, movement, demeanor. It almost looks like some of these guys take it personal if they lose a rep. He is one of those guys who seems to take it personal.
Yeah.
He's got great feet, and he is another Haynes. I did a poor job earlier of comparing Haynes and Beebe. Haynes has better feet than Beebe. Just simple, right? I think that's just the easiest way to look at the Haynes-Beebe comparison. I think Haynes might have better feet than a lot of players in this, a lot of offensive linemen in this class.
Yeah.
But I think Jimmy Powers, Jackson Johnson here is, I shouldn't say that's disrespectful. Jackson Powers Johnson is on that level of elite athlete and, heavy enough and powerful enough when he gets there to really create problems and running lanes and that kind of stuff where there's so much to like about his game.
Yeah.
What did he look like in the Senior Bowl, especially in the one-on-ones? And we all know the one-on-ones is set up for the defensive lineman to win in those situations. They are. But did he lose at all? Ever?
I think he might have lost one, and it might have just been simply because he kind of stumbled a little bit out of the gates. But yeah, there's so much to like with him. He checked into the Senior Bowl at 334 pounds. 328 pounds is what he was at the combine. So he lost a little bit, but he showed up at 334 to show that he can play guard. And I think that's important. But you watch him in the screen game, it's impressive. To see him get out in space like that at that size, that's impressive. And much of that is because of that initial snap to step quickness that he has. I mean, the snap and then that step, it's impressive. And he's stout. He stays square consistently. And that was the thing that I think stood out the most in Mobile was like, you see so many bull rushes in those one-on-one periods, and he just sat and anchored. I mean, former wrestler, he knows how to win at the point of attack. He understands leverage. Former baseball player as well. If the Lions have anything with baseball players, Ali McNeil was a former high school baseball player, batting like 321, if I remember correctly. And Jackson Powers Johnson is somebody that former baseball player, former wrestler, actually played a little defensive tackle in 2021. If you go to the Alamo Bowl, you'll see him lined up at defensive tackle. So like, there's so much to like with his game as a guard center. And I think if he was there at 29, they are sprinting to the podium. If he's in reaching distance of them at 29, they're moving up to get him, I think.
Yeah, he would be like, again, it's not a sexy pig. It's not a glamorous thing, but he would do so much in multiple positions. Like if you need to lean on him to play him as a center because something happens to Ragnow, all right, we got an elite player there.
Yeah.
And if you need to play him as a guard because that's what you need in year one, all right, we got an elite player there.
Yeah.
Either way, it's a great scenario for their offensive line. His ability to drop his hips and just stop everything is to me in this class, in a class full of really strong, powerful players, his ability to just shut things down instantly and as anchor is unmatched.
Yep.
And I just think that you can see it on the film in pass pro. It's hard to find reps where he loses.
Yeah.
It's hard to find reps where he even gives like much ground.
It almost, it's like so good that it almost gets boring. You know what I mean? You're like, it's so repetitive. It's like clockwork for him. And you're like, well, why aren't you driving him to the ground? Where's the fun stuff? And it's just like, he's fine with keeping that guy in front of him because he knows nothing's getting by him. And unfortunately for Detroit, there's just too many teams in front of them where they need help inside at center or guard, like Seattle at 16. You can make a case for Cincy at 18. The Rams have spent a lot of money at all those positions, but if they don't feel comfortable with Steve Avila moving inside to center, who knows what goes on there? Yeah. Pittsburgh, Miami, Philly. I mean, I know they just re-signed Landon Dickerson to the big contract, but you lost Jason Kelce, but you're in reaching distance of the
really nice replacement for Kelce, wouldn't it?
Right. If Minnesota keeps pick 23, which I don't think happens, but whoever they potentially trade with, whoever gets pick 23, who's to say they don't just value getting the extra first for a guy like this? I mean, there's so much to love with his game. So I don't think he's a realistic option. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much all the guards and centers that we have on the list. I have a couple more that I could fire off real quick if possible, but well, really just two of them at the guard position.
Yeah, I mean, we're an hour and 10. Let's if you want to add them, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, one I've already talked about a little bit as a prospect of the week 2-3 weeks ago. Dominic Puny out of Kansas played as a left tackle for them, but I think he's versatile enough with just his experience to play guard and tackle that he can do it, at the college level. He can do it in the NFL. I think he's got really good balance. He's under control in pass pro, good quickness when pulling and reaching. Really doesn't look limited in space, so that's always a big thing. Like when I think a guy might play tackle, and then or when he plays tackle, and then I think he's more of a guard. Did he move in space at all? Is there any issues there? I don't think so with him. I think he seals off defenders at the second level consistently. But similar to like Jordan Morgan in a way, opens his hips a little bit in pass pro. He oversets a little bit in run and pass pro. Pad level's a little high for a player of his size, but there's a lot to like with him. Comes from a family of athletes. His sister played college basketball at Eastern and Illinois State. He's actually a former volleyball player as well. His brother played at Central Missouri and was a UDFA with the Dallas Cowboys. So, like, again, he comes from a family history of athletes. I think he's a late day 2, day 3 type player. But I think if the Lions, again, passed on all these guys we talked about, I think he is certainly one of those guys. Dominic Puny, that is. I don't know if you had anything to add on him. If not, I can just go to my next guy. But.
No, I mean, so a couple of things for me with him is I love his feet.
Yep.
And you mentioned his pad level, and I think that's the biggest thing right now that he's got to fix because he plays tall, but he moves really well in short areas. And then the other thing that I think that's super impressive with him, and this is a hard thing for O-line, is the ability not to fire both of his hands at the same time. Like he'll do a lot of like, all right, I'm going to fire my outside arm. Right. And then, all right, now we're redirecting inside. I'm going to fire my inside arm. And he's square enough and technical enough that he can do those things and still stay square to the line of scrimmage and keep it, this is not a guy who has serious technical flaws.
Yeah.
I just think he's got to get a little more powered up. That's about it.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And then the next guy for me is, and this is the last one I have, is Cedric Van Pran Granger. You talk about messing up a name. There's a lot going on there. Some of my biggest concerns with him, just 298 pounds, arm length is really concerning, sub 32 inches, but you put on the tape, I mean, his anchor's definitely going to get tested as well, but you just look at him in the run game. I mean, he's stout at the point of attack there. He's very much, looking to drive and finish blocks there. I think he can catch guys, when he's comboing and getting up into the second level. I think he can catch those guards and really redirect them into a tackle or into a center or guard, depending on what position he's playing. And I think ultimately, like when I think of pro comparisons, I am not a pro comp guy. I throw him around every once in a while, but I saw a lot of like Lloyd Cushenberry when he was coming out of LSU. And I think they've got similar frames. I think Cushenberry was a little bit stronger and I think weighed a little bit more, but Cedric Van Pran Granger is a fun player when you watch the Georgia offense. And that's the big thing. He played at Georgia. So whether he was 300 pounds or not, to me, if you're able to withstand that, I think you can handle yourself in the NFL. If he can put on just 4 or 5 pounds, I think it's good for him. And I think he can. I think you can add a little bit there. The arm stuff is a little concerning when we look at him playing center because he's going to have to snap and step and really get that hand out quick enough. And you think of like short arm centers, the first player always for me is Dominic Raiola. He had very short arms, but I think this is a guy that's probably a early day 3 pick and a developmental player. But if the Lions pass on all these guys we've talked about, I think Puny and Van Pran Granger are those guys.
So to me, he's super scrappy.
Yeah.
And I would trust a player who's played in really high leverage situations in that Georgia offense, on that offensive line. As fiery as he is, as scrappy as he is, I know he's a little undersized, but it goes back a little bit to I think we talked about this a couple days ago. Just the idea of, yeah, he's a little undersized, but show me where he loses because he's a little undersized.
Yeah,
I don't know that you're going to find a lot of that because the demeanor, the play style, he does have heavy hands.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when he lands them, good. You know, I think the length can be mitigated as a center. But I see a super scrappy player who is wanting to be in the mix all the time. And I think you can overcome some of the size I mean, if he was 310 pounds, we would say, cool.
Right.
You know, can he get a little stronger and add a little weight? Sure.
Yeah.
But
yeah, if he was 310, we'd be talking about him more.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I like him. I think he's a good player. I think you kind of pegged where he'll go. So, nice option a little bit later. Yeah.
Yeah. No. That's it. That's all we got. I mean, that's the old line.
Back for tackles. We're going to do tackles.
Yep. We're going to get more into the juicy stuff. We're going to talk about some of the offensive tackles. That includes a player that we didn't really get into yet, but Troy Fautanu. He'll fall into that category. We've got quite a few different guys that might be listed as guards on a mock draft or whatever, or you might have them as a guard. We have them as a tackle. We'll get into why we think that, and we'll get into more of that. So, you guys, of course, can follow us on Twitter or X at Russ NFL Draft and at Bischoff_Scott. But please do us the service of rating, reviewing, and subscribing to Detroit Lions podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other podcast platforms. Your subscriptions, your ratings, your reviews all go a long way. So we appreciate it, and we always appreciate the support and any feedback. If you got comments, let us know. Maybe we'll read them before we do the offensive tackle piece and maybe give a couple shout outs to people. I know our follower, Brandon Kerr, on Twitter, has got a segment idea for us. So I got to reach out to him on Twitter and follow up with him. But I think there's a lot of intrigue there. So he's a great listener. We always appreciate the comments. But he's Scott Bischoff. I'm Russ Brown. This is Bischoff and Brown right here on the Detroit Lions podcast.